long before European sails caught the riptides of the Atlantic, and centuries before the compass needle trembled toward the north. A people set out upon the vast Pacific Ocean with nothing but their eyes, their hands, and an unshakable knowledge of the sea. These were the Polynesians, a seafaring culture whose double-hulled canoes carved pathways across thousands of miles of open water, connecting remote islands and forming one of the greatest human migrations in history. The Polynesian voyages were not accidental drifts. They were guided by the stars, shaped by the swells, and anchored in a worldview that the ocean was home, not barrier. The story begins in the realms of Southeast Asia and Melanesia more than 3,000 years ago, where early sailors first developed the skills to voyage between islands. Over centuries, these people refined boat building, navigation, and social structures until they ventured into the open Pacific. In time, they settled the Polynesian Triangle, the expanse from Hawaii in the north, Aotearoa, New Zealand in the south, and Rapa Nui, Easter Island in the east. The craft they used, the Waiakaulua, or double-hulled voyaging canoe, was tailored for stability, endurance, and the endless blue. These canoes were not small or simple. Some measured 50 to 60 feet long and carried families, planting materials, livestock, and supplies for months at sea. They were seaworthy in a way the Mediterranean mariner might not believe. Their sails were made of matting, their paddles long and efficient, and the whole craft balanced against waves by the twin hulls lashed together. Navigation was not by compass, charts, or sextant. Instead, Polynesian wayfinding relied on an intimate reading of nature. The flight of birds, color of clouds, pattern of waves, swells refracted by islands just beyond the horizon, and the stars overhead. One star, the zenith star Arcturus, Hawaiian Hokulea Star of Gladness, guided the Hawaiians, giving both name and direction to their mythology and craft. Such navigation required the seafarer to be aware of every sensation: the smell of reef, the taste of wind, the feel of changing swells. It was a science of the body and the mind, passed down through oral tradition and ensured by ritual. As these ocean journeys matured, Polynesians discovered that the sea did not separate, but connected. The islands were stepping stones, not endpoints. They carried not only canoes, but entire cultures: taro and breadfruit plants, pigs, chickens, obsidian for tool-making, and stories that shaped identity. Their voyages created kinship ties across thousands of miles of ocean. Their navigators were heroes, not conquerors, who brought people together under the same wind and stars. One of the most luminous chapters of this tradition unfolded in the 20th century when the Polynesian Voyaging Society, PVS, was founded in 1973 in Hawaii to revive the ancient art of wayfinding. In 1976, their replica double-hulled canoe, named Hokulea, sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti without instruments, demonstrating the effectiveness of the traditional navigation. The journey reignited cultural pride throughout Polynesia and challenged long-stood assumptions that the early voyagers had drifted aimlessly rather than purposefully. The appearance of Polynesian seafaring to outside observers often carried the myth of chance drift. But archaeological and ethnographic research now show a far different truth. The ability to navigate thousands of miles across open ocean shows planning, observation, and knowledge passed down across generations. These voyages represent one of mankind's greatest achievements of movement and connection, a human expansion across Oceanic, realms long before modern ships and systems. Tatidai, nature of Polynesian society itself supported such endeavors. Social structures were built around voyaging. Genealogies, chiefs, skilled navigators, and artisans all had roles. The voyaging canoe was not simply a transport vehicle, but a symbol of community, identity, and connection. As a result, Polynesian cultures developed with a worldview shaped by the ocean, an oceanic mindset rather than a continental one. The sea was home, not barrier. Islands were not isolated. They were linked. Through this network of islands and voyages, the Polynesians reshaped the map of the Pacific. Boat building itself was a refined craft. Timber from large trees such as koa in Hawaii or breadfruit were hollowed, hulls lashed, cross beams extended, and mat sails raised. Master craftsmen understood the construction as a technological and cultural act. The canoe had to endure storms, carry island life supplies, and launch off reefs. In the waves, they were at home. The complexity of these vessels and the feat of their voyages show a maritime culture of high sophistication. Navigation remained central. The navigator used the stars to set latitude, the swells and currents to detect islands beyond the eye's reach, and the behaviors of birds that flew out to sea each morning and returned each evening to land. Cloud shapes over reefs, reflections on the water, and patterns of sea foam were all read. These techniques were rarely documented in writing. They were embodied in oral knowledge, memorized chants, stick charts of wave reflection in the Marshall Islands, and deep training stretching years. One of the remarkable things is that these navigators perfected their craft without modern instruments. The success of the Hokulea confirmed that ancient Polynesians could travel thousands of miles with precision. That expedition continues to serve as a living symbol of voyaging and culture. The expansion of Polynesian voyaging left cultural and archaeological traces across the Pacific. From Hawaii to New Zealand, Tonga to Easter Island, settlers carried plants, animals, and crafts. Linguistic and DNA studies show connections between islands that match the seafaring patterns. The timing of settlement, the routes taken, and the craftsmanship of the canoes themselves all point to deliberate movement and deep knowledge of the sea. The islands were colonized with purpose, creating a vast ocean-spanning civilization whose size and coherence challenge earlier Eurocentric narratives of exploration. But the Polynesian voyaging culture did not exist in pristine isolation. It intersected with the environment in complex ways. The islands of the Pacific are subject to storms, volcanic eruptions, reef hazards, and changing sea levels. The voyagers understood these risks and developed systems of risk management, timing of voyages, ritual preparation, and communal support. The knowledge of sea conditions, seasonal winds, and star patterns allowed successful voyages and settlements. The double-hulled canoe itself was a technological adaptation to a challenging environment, enabling long voyages while providing stability and capacity. As centuries passed, colonial contact disrupted many of these traditions. Missionaries, disease, and Western schooling eroded the oral knowledge of wayfinding. Yet, the late 20th century brought a revitalization. The Hokulea voyages are more than cultural performances. They are political and spiritual acts of reclamation. Through these modern expeditions, Hawaiians and other Polynesians reclaim the voyaging heritage, reviving language, arts, and cultural pride. The revival emphasizes the importance of indigenous knowledge, sustainability, and respect for the ocean, lessons urgently relevant in the age of climate change. Today, the significance of Polynesian voyaging continues to grow. Beyond cultural identity, these traditions offer insights into human navigation, adaptation, and connection. The capacity to traverse the world's largest ocean without modern tools challenges how we understand human capability. The wayfinding techniques, many of which were nearly lost, remind us that simplicity and observation can unlock complexity. Moreover, voyaging holds ecological and ethical implications. The Polynesian worldview sees the ocean as kin and the land and sea as interconnected. The unfolding of the voyaging tradition provides a model for stewardship, not just of islands, but of the oceanic biosphere. The vessels that sail today carry in their hulls the story of sustainability, respect for the elements, and collective memory. They remind us that human culture and the natural world share a deep bond. The narrative of Polynesian voyages also reshapes global histories. It invites us to reconsider who explored, who connected, and who understood the world first. The Pacific was never a blank map awaiting discovery. It was the home of explorers who charted it long before European ships arrived. By recentering Polynesian voyaging in our understanding, we honor the contributions of an oceanic civilization whose reach and sophistication were extraordinary. In the vast open sea, the Polynesians found not emptiness, but presence. The islands they settled were not remote outposts, but home and hub. Their canoes were not vessels of drift, but vehicles of purpose. Their route lines were not accidents, but choices. Their knowledge was not lost, but hidden until it could rise again, carried on the swell and star chart of the night. As we look to the future, as climate change, rising seas and globalization challenge our planet, the lesson remains: connection matters. Community matters. Observation matters. The steersman may no longer rely on swells or birds, but the same spirit of voyaging drives humanity onward, past known horizons to new frontiers of understanding. The story of Polynesian voyages is the story of the seas themselves and of our place within them. And as the double-hulled canoe glides across moonlit water, its sail full of ancient wind, we remember that exploration is not merely about new lands. It is about remembering what we already are. Seafarers shaped by the waves, guided by stars, connected by islands. In the deep folds of the Pacific night, when clouds veiled the stars and the ocean swelled with an ancient heartbeat, the Polynesian navigator became one with his vessel. He felt the pulse of the canoe beneath his feet, the rhythm of the twin hulls slicing water, the strain of lashings in the wind. His senses extended outward until sea, sky, and soul converged. The horizon was not a line, but a living field of signs. Each gust of wind carried memory. Each wave crest whispered direction. Such was the artistry of wayfinding. Not written, not drawn, but lived through generations of voyagers who read the ocean as their ancestors once read the forest and sky. To understand Polynesian seafaring is to enter a cosmos where knowledge, faith, and survival intertwine. The navigator's duty was sacred. Before departure, he sought omens in the flight of birds or in the flicker of dawn. Chant and ritual consecrated the voyage, affirming unity between crew, canoe, and cosmos. The canoe was a microcosm of the island, a floating world where every member had a role and every resource a purpose. Water was rationed, food stored in woven baskets, and fire tended carefully in stone-lined pits. The voyage was both migration and ceremony, an act of trust between humans and the vast unknown. In the heart of this maritime universe, lay a constellation of stars whose names passed through chants. Te Mata Aotearoa, the eyes of the god. Hokupa, the fixed star of the north. Rehua, the healer star of summer. Each star rose and set on predictable paths, providing an invisible lattice across the heavens. The navigator memorized their bearings, not as numbers or degrees, but as relationships. Star to island, island to current, current to the heart. When one star sank, another rose to mark a new direction. In this living map, the sky turned, but the voyager's sense of place remained constant. The earliest known migrations from the region of Tonga and Samoa spread eastward around 900 BCE, reaching the Marquesas, the Tuamotus, and eventually Tahiti. These voyages required open ocean crossings of hundreds of miles, unprecedented in the ancient world. By 1000 CE, Polynesian explorers had reached the furthest corners of the Pacific: Hawaii in the north, Aotearoa in the south, and Rapa Nui in the east. In each new land they carried not conquest, but continuity: seeds, songs, tools, and genealogies. Their language evolved into dialects but retained a shared ancestry. Their art and beliefs mirrored common roots. Archaeological evidence from obsidian trade and genetic studies confirm this vast web of connection. On the island of Savaii in Samoa, oral histories recall the canoes that departed eastward, their hulls carved with ancestral symbols, their sails stitched from pandanus leaves. In the Cook Islands, legends speak of Ru, the navigator who discovered Aitutaki by following the flight of a frigate bird across dawn seas. In Hawaii, the Epic of Moekaha tells of voyages between Tahiti and Kauai, guided by the red star AA. Though separated by thousands of miles, these stories form one narrative: the human urge to cross the unknown, to link distant shores by faith and memory. European observers of later centuries could scarcely comprehend the scale of these achievements. When Captain James Cook encountered the Tahitian navigator Tupaia in 1769, he found a man who could draw a chart of the Pacific covering thousands of miles, identifying more than 70 islands and their relative positions by memory alone. Tupaia's knowledge, drawn from oral tradition and star paths, astonished the Europeans who believed such navigation impossible without instruments. It revealed what Polynesians had always known: the ocean was their continent, and they had mapped it long before others claimed discovery. Each island became a cultural node, adapting voyaging traditions to its environment. On Aotearoa, where seas were colder and trees taller, canoes became broader and heavier, carved from giant kauri trunks. In the Marquesas and Society Islands, where coral reefs framed lagoons, boats were lighter, agile, suited for inter-island trade. In Tonga and Fiji, the art of sail design reached aesthetic perfection: crab-claw sails that captured both light wind and power, enabling long tacks across the horizon. The craftsmanship of these vessels reflected not only engineering skill, but philosophical vision. Harmony between human form, natural material, and elemental force. Voyaging also shaped social structure. The navigator, or Taunga Faiva, held authority akin to priesthood. His knowledge of star lore and sea rhythm placed him close to the divine. Chiefs sought his guidance not only for travel, but for legitimacy. To lead one's people across the sea was proof of divine favor. Women, too, played crucial roles, tending the hearth aboard, preserving food, maintaining ritual purity, and transmitting genealogies that defined identity. The canoe was a society in miniature, a moving world bound by trust. As settlements matured, voyaging remained vital. Inter-island exchange brought basalt adzes from Samoa to the Tuamotus, feathers from Hawaii to Tahiti, and obsidian from the Society Islands to Rapa Nui. These networks of exchange mirrored the ocean currents themselves, constant, circular, life-giving. Through them, innovation spread. Fishing technologies, artistic motifs, religious ideas. The Pacific was not a scattering of isolated worlds, but a single oceanic civilization. The decline of large-scale voyaging began gradually. Population growth made some islands self-sufficient. The need for expansion waned. Climatic shifts, possibly related to the medieval warm period, altered wind patterns, making long voyages riskier. By the time Europeans arrived, many island societies had turned inward, preserving their canoes for fishing and local travel. Yet the memory of great journeys persisted in chant and myth. Stories of ancestors arriving from the rising sun or following the path of the whale kept the spiritual compass alive, even when sails no longer filled with the trade winds. When the Hokulea set sail in 1976, she carried not only a crew, but the weight of 1,000 years of silence. Her master navigator, Mau Piailug of Satawal in Micronesia, was among the last traditional wayfinders. He guided the voyage from Hawaii to Tahiti using only stars, swells, and birds. When land appeared after weeks at sea, tears and chants rose together. It was not a discovery, but a return, a circle closed across centuries. That voyage ignited cultural renaissance throughout Polynesia. Youth learned star lines, craftsmen rebuilt canoes, and elders reawakened the chants. The ocean once again became a pathway of identity. Beyond its cultural meaning, the revival of voyaging offered scientific insight. Studies of wayfinding have shown how human perception can integrate subtle environmental cues. The polarization of light at sunrise and sunset, the long-period swell created by distant storms, even bioluminescent plankton patterns marking current boundaries. Modern research confirms that Polynesian navigation was not mystical intuition, but an advanced empirical system encoded in oral tradition. Each navigator was both scientist and poet, translating the ocean's language into movement. The spiritual dimension, however, cannot be separated from the practical. In Polynesian cosmology, the ocean was born of divine parents, Tangaroa, god of the sea, and Papahanaumoku, the earth mother. To sail upon it was to enter a sacred domain. Every voyage began with offerings: a lock of hair, a carved figure, a prayer whispered to the waves. The navigator sought balance between courage and humility, between human ambition and the will of the sea. The success of a journey affirmed cosmic harmony. A shipwreck was not merely misfortune, but a rupture in relationship between people and ocean. In this worldview, geography itself was alive. Islands were not mere landforms, but ancestors, guardians, and teachers. The stars were not distant suns, but navigational kin. This perception of interconnectedness explains the resilience of Polynesian culture even amid colonial disruption. When Western contact brought steel and guns, missions and maps, the old star paths receded, but did not vanish. Hidden within chants, they waited for a generation ready to listen again. During the 20th century, as nations across the Pacific sought independence and identity, voyaging became a symbol of renewal. In Samoa, Fiji, Tonga, Tahiti, and Hawaii, traditional canoe projects flourished. The Hokulea was joined by sister vessels, Te Aurera, Hine Moana, Fa'afaite, and others, each retracing ancestral roots and carrying messages of unity and environmental stewardship. When the Hokulea completed her worldwide voyage in 2017, she had sailed 42,000 miles, visiting ports from South Africa to the Americas, spreading the concept of Malama Honua, to care for our island Earth. The continuity between past and present voyaging holds profound lessons. The same techniques that once connected islands now connect cultures in dialogue about sustainability. The double-hulled canoe becomes metaphor, two parallel hulls joined by a deck of balance, carrying humanity and nature together across uncertain waters. In a world of climate crisis and displacement, the Polynesian ethos reminds us that navigation is not domination, but relationship. That every voyage must respect the forces that make life possible. Under the Pacific moon, a modern navigator still stands at the prow, tracing stars as his ancestors did. He feels the swell from the southwest, notes the tilt of the mast, listens to the wind funnel between sails. Around him, digital satellites orbit the same sky, but his eyes remain fixed on constellations older than civilization. The technology may differ, yet the spirit endures. Humanity continues to voyage, through oceans, through knowledge, through time itself. If one listens carefully, the ocean still tells the story. The hiss of surf upon coral is the same song that guided Tupaya's canoe. The scent of pandanus, sails drying in the sun, evokes the craft of countless artisans. The rustle of palm leaves recalls the villages where families once watched horizons for returning voyagers. The Pacific breathes memory into every wave, and within that memory, the human story expands, not as conquest, but communion. The Polynesian voyagers teach that to know the world is to move within it, not above it. Their seafaring was an act of participation, a dialogue with currents and clouds. Through them, geography becomes poetry, and exploration becomes reverence. Their legacy endures wherever humans look to the horizon and feel the pull of something greater. The promise that beyond every line of water lies another world, waiting not to be conquered, but remembered. As the Pacific dawn glows once more across the horizon, the legacy of the Polynesian voyagers stretches far beyond the waters they crossed. It lives in the songs of elders, in the carvings of prows and paddles, in the rhythmic chants of haka and siva, in the oceanic pulse that beats through every island child who grows up watching the sunrise over the sea. For millennia, these islands were not separated by water. They were connected by it. The ocean was not a barrier, but a bridge of memory, a breathing archive of journeys and names. Archaeology continues to reveal how astonishingly sophisticated this oceanic network was. Traces of Polynesian obsidian tools have been found on islands hundreds of miles apart, evidence of sustained trade and movement. Chicken bones from pre-Columbian sites in Chile bear genetic markers of Polynesian origin, suggesting that voyagers may have reached the South American coast centuries before European explorers ever set sail. The sweet potato, native to the Andes, was found across Polynesia long before European contact. Known by similar names like Kumara, Umara, and Kumala, it became proof of an ancient connection across the largest ocean on Earth, a living symbol of exchange and encounter. Such connections reveal a truth often overlooked by early historians. that the Pacific was not an isolated realm of islands waiting to be discovered, but the heart of a vast and dynamic civilization that spanned thousands of miles of open water. The Polynesians were the world's first deep ocean mariners, mastering navigation centuries before the age of European exploration. Their achievements were born not of instruments, but of intimacy, a dialogue between human senses and the rhythms of nature so precise that it could chart invisible pathways across the sea. For a modern mind, it is difficult to imagine voyaging without compass or sextant, without written charts or astrolabe. Yet for the navigators of Hawaii, knowledge was carried in the body. They memorized the roll and pitch of the ocean's swells, how one pattern rose from the trade winds, another from far-off storms near Antarctica. They studied the way clouds formed above unseen islands, heavy and still with reflected moisture. They learned to watch the flight of certain birds, terns, noddies, frigate birds, whose habits revealed the nearness of land. Each detail, when woven together, became a map more fluid and multidimensional than parchment could ever hold. Anthropologists later compared this way of knowing to a living symphony, a sensory art that united astronomy, meteorology, and instinct. The navigator did not read data. He read rhythm. He felt the weight of the sea through his knees as he sat cross-legged in the canoe, aligning his body with its motion. He recited the star compass, an oral chart in which each direction corresponded to a constellation or the rising of a star cluster. As he chanted, he traveled through the heavens in memory before ever setting sail. The human mind, trained over years of observation, became both compass and chronometer. The ancient canoes themselves were feats of ecological understanding. Constructed from breadfruit or koa trees, bound with coconut fiber rather than nails, and sealed with natural sap, they embodied sustainability long before the word existed. Every component came from nature, and every voyage returned wisdom to the land. A canoe was not merely a vehicle, it was kin. The lashings that bound its hulls symbolized familial ties. The mast represented the world tree, rising between sea and sky. When a canoe was launched, priests offered prayers to the spirits of the forest and the ancestors who had guided previous journeys. To harm a canoe was to harm the lineage it carried. When Polynesian canoes crossed vast distances, they also carried the seeds of transformation. Upon each landfall, voyagers brought not just tools and crops, but the social codes that governed their communities. They transplanted kapu systems of sacred law, kinship hierarchies, and agricultural knowledge. They adapted to local conditions, building irrigation systems in Hawaii, terraced gardens in Aotearoa, and stone statues in Rapa Nui. Each environment demanded innovation, and through adaptation, Polynesian culture evolved while preserving its deep structure. This balance between tradition and change remains one of the most remarkable aspects of Polynesian civilization. The same navigational chants that once guided canoes between atolls later found expression in poetry and ritual. Dance became the embodied memory of journey. The sway of hips mimicking the roll of the sea, the outstretched arms recalling the unfurling of sails. Even architecture mirrored voyaging forms, meeting houses shaped like inverted canoes, roof beams carved like masts, their entrances facing the direction of ancestral homelands across the ocean. European contact, beginning in the late 18th century, disrupted but did not extinguish this oceanic identity. Missionaries, traders, and colonizers brought new technologies and diseases, redrawing maps that had once been lived rather than drawn. Yet, even as colonial cartographers divided the Pacific into names and borders, the deeper geography of Polynesia remained unbroken. A geography of stories, winds, and routes remembered in chant. Beneath the imposed coordinates, the old sea lanes endured in memory. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, Polynesians faced pressures to abandon their ancestral practices. Christian missions discouraged voyaging rituals as pagan remnants. Western education prioritized written literacy over oral tradition. The canoe, once the vessel of identity, became a relic. But memory cannot be erased where the ocean itself is the archive. In small villages across Micronesia, elders quietly preserved the art of star navigation, passing it to apprentices in secret, knowing that someday the world would need it again. That day arrived in the 1970s, when a new generation sought to reclaim their origins. Anthropologists like David Lewis documented traditional navigators in the Caroline Islands, while Hawaiian visionaries such as Herb Cain, Ben Finney, and Nainoa Thompson built Hokulea, a double-hulled canoe modeled after ancestral designs. When the canoe sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti using only traditional methods, guided by Maupiailug, it reawakened an identity long dormant. The voyage proved not just historical continuity, but cultural resilience. Proof that ancestral wisdom still lived in Pacific hearts. As the Hokulea glided into Papete's harbor in 1976, thousands gathered in tears and song. For many Polynesians, it was the first tangible connection to a past denied by centuries of colonial narrative. The sight of a traditional canoe returning from the horizon symbolized rebirth. The voyage inspired a renaissance across the Pacific. Canoes were rebuilt, star compasses taught anew, and the ocean once again became a classroom for identity. Since then, a growing movement of oceanic revival has transformed the Pacific into a living museum of motion. In Samoa, the Gawalofa sails to connect islands once more. In Aotearoa, Te Aurere, and Ngahiraka Mai Tawiti trace ancestral roots across the Tasman. In Tahiti, Fa'afate carries youth to rediscover the teachings of the sea. Together, they form a flotilla of remembrance, not of nostalgia, but of continuity. Modern voyagers use these journeys not merely to celebrate the past, but to confront the present. As sea levels rise and coral reefs bleach, the Pacific Islands face existential threat. Yet the voyaging tradition offers a message of adaptation and humility. The ocean that once gave life now demands respect. By relearning the ways of their ancestors, reading currents, respecting tides, living within ecological balance, Pacific peoples reclaim both heritage and hope. Today, aboard a voyaging canoe under digital skies, the stars are joined by satellites, but the rhythm of navigation remains the same. The navigator listens, waits, feels. The sea's heartbeat merges with his own. He stands beneath the Milky Way, the same cosmic river that guided the first explorers out of Samoa 3,000 years ago. Each journey reaffirms what those ancient mariners already knew, that knowledge is not stored in maps, but carried in memory, sung in the heart, lived through motion. To outsiders, such voyaging may seem like daring exploration, but to Polynesians, it is simply returning home, to a universe where distance dissolves, and where islands, stars, and people are all kin. Their cosmology extends beyond geography. The sea is the pathway between worlds, connecting ancestors to descendants, gods to mortals. The canoe becomes the vessel of the soul, an image echoed even in funerary rituals, where spirits sail westward into the sunset, following the eternal path of the voyagers. The philosophical depth of Polynesian seafaring lies in its perception of knowledge as relational. The navigator learns not through domination of nature, but through conversation with it. He listens to wind and water as equals. This worldview challenges the mechanistic separation of human and environment that shaped later maritime history. In Polynesia, to sail well is to live rightly, in balance, in gratitude, in rhythm. The rediscovery of these principles has resonated far beyond the Pacific. Scholars of environmental ethics, oceanography, and anthropology now draw upon Polynesian navigation as a model of ecological intelligence, an embodied wisdom that modern technology cannot replicate. Voyaging is not nostalgia, it is relevance. It offers a metaphor for navigating the uncertain waters of the 21st century, where climate change and cultural disconnection threaten our collective direction. As Hokulea completed her global circumnavigation, she carried a message carved into her mission, Malama Honua, to care for our island Earth. In the eyes of her crew, Earth itself is one great island, surrounded by the cosmic sea. This is not poetic imagery, but profound truth. Every species, every nation, every wave and wind connected within a single, living system. Polynesian voyaging, once dismissed as primitive myth, now stands as one of humanity's most advanced forms of environmental philosophy. When night descends upon the Pacific, the stars appear not as distant points, but as ancestral fires. The navigator lifts his gaze to Orion's belt, Tautaru, and traces the pathway to Sirius, known as the Burning One. He feels the swell shift and adjusts the sail. Beneath him, the ocean glows faintly with plankton light, a celestial mirror of the sky above. Between these twin infinities, sea and sky, the canoe glides forward, steady, timeless. The voyage continues, and when dawn finally breaks, illuminating the curve of an island on the horizon, the green slope of a volcanic ridge, the mist of waterfalls descending to the reef, there is no cry of conquest, no claim of discovery. There is only recognition. The navigator smiles, not at a new world, but at the return of a familiar one. For every voyage in Polynesian memory is both departure and homecoming, a circle without end. In the quiet that follows landfall, the canoe rests upon the tide, creaking softly as if sighing in relief. The crew steps ashore, carrying gifts of gratitude, shells, garlands, chants. They kneel and press their foreheads to the ground, acknowledging the spirit of place. Above them, palms sway in the trade wind, whispering welcome. The cycle of voyaging has completed once more. Exploration balanced by belonging, movement by memory, courage by reverence. This is the enduring lesson of the Polynesian voyagers, that humanity's greatest map is not drawn in ink or charted in longitude, but inscribed in the relationship between earth, ocean, and sky. To navigate is to know, to connect, to become part of the world rather than apart from it. Across time and tide, their story reminds us that we, too, are voyagers, inheritors of the same curiosity that once sent canoes beyond the horizon. Somewhere tonight, under the southern stars, a young apprentice studies the constellations, tracing the path of his ancestors. His canoe lies ready, its twin hulls gleaming under moonlight. He breathes in the salt air, steadying his heart. The wind stirs, the ocean calls, And as the sail rises into the dark, he joins the eternal rhythm of discovery, humanity's endless voyage between sands and stars.